My father and brother handed me a check for $50,000 and erased me from the family legacy. For 10 years, that cold dismissal fueled me. So, when my brother's $50 million empire was collapsing, I was the one who answered the phone and said, "Hello, brother. I believe you're in debt to me now." Tonight, I want to share a story that cuts right to the heart of what we explore here: betrayal, resilience, and the kind of justice that takes years to serve cold. This is one of those family revenge stories that feels like it was ripped straight from a Hollywood script, but I assure you, the emotions behind it are profoundly real. It's a story about a birthright, a vineyard worth over $50 million, and a sister's silent vow. Imagine this. The air in a sterile San Francisco auction house is thick with attention you could cut with a knife. On the block isn't a priceless painting, but the soul of a Napa Valley legacy: the massive, consolidated debt of the Luna Soul Vineyard. For Julian Rossi, watching via a frantic video call from his lavish office overlooking those very vines, this was his day of reckoning. He'd expanded too fast, gambled too much on glamour over quality. He just needed some anonymous corporate entity to buy the debt, someone he could negotiate with, someone who didn't know his secrets. The auctioneer's gavel struck the wood with a deafening crack. Sold. To the private bidder on line 3. A wave of dizzying relief washed over Julian. He was saved. His personal phone buzzed, the screen showing a number he hadn't seen in a decade. He answered, expecting a lawyer. Instead, a calm, female voice echoed through the speaker, as smooth and cold as chilled Chardonnay. "Hello, brother," it said. "Surprised? The person who now owns your future, who holds the fate of everything you cherish, is me, Isabella." His world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. If you've ever felt like the forgotten one in your family, the one whose potential was always overlooked, just type the city you're watching from in the comments. Let's see how far this silent strength reaches. To understand the 10 years of ice packed into that single phone call, you have to rewind. You have to leave the cold, corporate world of San Francisco and travel about 60 miles north into the sun-drenched heart of Napa Valley. A decade earlier, this is where the Luna Soul Vineyard wasn't a line item of debt, but a sprawling, living kingdom of emerald green leaves and deep purple fruit. It was a place that smelled of rich, damp earth after a morning mist and the sweet, looming promise of fermentation on a hot afternoon. This was Isabella's world. At 25, she was the true heir to Luna Soul, not by name, but by spirit. Her hands, perpetually stained with a bit of dirt under the nails or the faint purple of grape skins, knew the personality of every vine row. She could tell by the feel of a leaf if a cluster needed more sun or less water. For her, winemaking wasn't a chemical process, it was a conversation with the land. She was the vineyard's soul. Her brother, Julian, 5 years her senior, was its polished salesman. He walked the rows in pristine Italian loafers, his phone always pressed to his ear, negotiating distribution deals in Asia or planning lavish tasting events that were more about glamour than grapes. He saw the vines not as living things, but as assets on a spreadsheet. Their father, a proud, traditional man who had built the empire from a few acres of dirt, saw Julian's slick ambition as the future and Isabella's deep passion as a charming, but ultimately unprofitable, hobby. He couldn't see that one was cultivating a legacy, while the other was just building a brand. It's a classic family dynamic, isn't it? Let me know in the comments, were you the one always fixing things, the quiet savior, or were you the one who was always meant to be the star? Type savior if you were the fixer, or star if you were the golden child. I'm curious to see the balance in our community tonight. That fatal dynamic, the star versus the savior, reached its breaking point when their father's health began to fail. The man who had once commanded the fields with a booming voice was now confined to his study, his legendary strength fading, his fear for the future of his empire growing with every passing day. This was the opening Julian had been waiting for. He didn't approach his father with pleas or raw emotion. He came armed with weapons Isabella didn't know how to fight, sleek binders filled with spreadsheets, polished PowerPoint presentations, and 5-year profit projections that were more fiction than fact. He sat with their father for hours, spinning a sophisticated narrative of impending doom. He painted a picture of a ruthless, evolving wine industry that would leave their quaint, traditional methods in the dust. Isabella's approach is beautiful, Dad. It's pure art. But art doesn't pay the bills in a global market, he'd argue, his voice a perfect blend of feigned respect and urgent concern. He presented his own high-risk, debt-leveraged expansion plan as the only path forward, a bold stroke to secure the Rossi name for generations. Systematically, he framed Isabella's deep love for the land as a financial liability, a romantic notion that couldn't compete. Weakened, scared, and seeing his life's work through Julian's distorted lens of corporate speak, their father buckled. The lawyers were called. The will, once a simple document, was rewritten with complex clauses and holding company jargon. When it was done, Luna Sol, all 2,000 acres, the winery, the brand, the very house she grew up in, it all belonged to Julian. Isabella was handed a cashier's check for $50,000, a sum that was less a severance and more a final, crushing insult. She wasn't just fired, she was erased. That $50,000 check felt heavier than a block of granite in her pocket. It was the price of her soul, according to her family. She left Napa Valley without a single goodbye, driving her old pickup truck east until the rolling green hills flattened into the endless, anonymous plains of the Midwest. She landed in Chicago, of all places. She found a tiny, seventh-floor apartment with a view not of sprawling vineyards, but of brick walls and the relentless, roaring elevated train. The warm California sun was replaced by the harsh, unforgiving glare of the city and a bone-chilling wind that whipped off Lake Michigan. For weeks, she was a ghost, haunted by the phantom scent of soil and grapes. The world she knew, the only identity she ever had, was gone. Every bottle of wine she saw in a store window felt like a personal accusation. One freezing night, standing at her window, looking out at the millions of distant, disconnected city lights, something inside her shifted. The overwhelming grief didn't vanish, but it began to crystallize. It hardened from a liquid sorrow into a diamond-sharp point of resolve. The tears finally stopped. She looked at her faint reflection in the dark glass and made a vow. It wasn't a vow spoken aloud to the uncaring city, but a silent promise that settled deep in her bones. She wouldn't just get revenge. That was too simple, too emotional. No, she would become the weapon that systematically dismantled Julian's new empire. She would learn the cold language of money and power that he respected so much, and she would use it to take back not just the land, but her name, her story, and her very spirit. That night, the heartbroken winemaker died, and an architect of justice was born. If you have ever had to build yourself back up from nothing, fighting for your own worth when no one else would, this space is for you. Subscribe and join a community of people who know that the quietest vows are often the most powerful. A vow made in darkness must be forged in fire. Isabella didn't waste a single day wallowing. That $50,000, the sum meant to silence her and cast her aside, became her seed money. It wasn't enough to start a new life, but it was just enough to build a new identity. She didn't move to a city with wineries. She moved to the city of wolves. New York City. With fierce determination, she got into NYU's Stern School of Business, diving headfirst into the brutal, unforgiving world of high finance. While her peers were networking for future Wall Street glory, Isabella was a woman possessed by a singular mission. She wasn't just studying, she was training for a war. Her case studies weren't academic exercises, they were dissections of failed family businesses, of legacy companies that had collapsed under the weight of hubris and debt. Upon graduation, she didn't chase the flashiest job. She strategically took a position at a boutique private equity firm that specialized in a very specific niche, acquiring and restructuring distressed assets in the luxury agricultural and beverage sectors. Wineries, distilleries, high-end food brands. She worked punishing, 18-hour days, a quiet force surrounded by loud men who initially underestimated her. They saw a woman from California. They didn't see the calculating mind or the fire behind her calm eyes. She learned precisely how banks package corporate debt, how to spot financial weakness from a mile away, and how to leverage that weakness for maximum impact. Over 10 years, she transformed. The girl with dirt under her fingernails was replaced by a woman in a tailored power suit who could command a boardroom with a single, soft-spoken sentence. She built a small fortune, But more importantly, she built an arsenal of knowledge. She became a ghost in the machine of high finance, a silent predator, patiently waiting for the scent of familiar weakness to drift east from a certain sun-drenched valley back home. And while Isabella was meticulously building her arsenal in the concrete canyons of Manhattan, her brother Julian was busy building a hollow kingdom in Napa Valley. Drunk on his initial success and the power he had stolen, he made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He confused brand with substance. He poured millions of dollars, all of it borrowed money, not into the soil that gave the vineyard life, but into the glittering facade. He constructed a sprawling 20,000 square foot visitor center of glass and steel that looked more like a modern art museum than a working winery. The intimate, rustic tasting room their father had built was gutted and replaced with a chic, soulless bar with velvet ropes and a resident DJ on weekends. Julian was chasing magazine covers and celebrity endorsements, not excellence in a bottle. He cut corners in the vineyard, replacing experienced, lifelong viticulturists who had worked with his father for decades with cheaper, less skilled labor crews. He ignored the subtle signs of blight in the old-growth Zinfandel vines, the very ones their father had called the heart of Luna Sol. The wine itself inevitably began to suffer. Critics who once lauded Luna Sol's complex, terroir-driven wines now used polite but damning words like generic and over-commercialized. They lost their coveted 95-point rating from Wine Spectator, a blow to their prestige that Julian publicly dismissed as the opinion of out-of-touch reviewers. In his mind, Isabella was a distant, irrelevant memory, probably working some menial job in a Chicago restaurant, still bitter about what was best for the family. He stood atop a mountain of debt, admiring the view, completely oblivious to the fact that his sister, the quiet geologist of his downfall, was watching the fault lines spread right beneath his feet. For 10 years, Isabella watched and waited. Her life in New York was a masterclass in patience, a long, slow game of chess played across an entire continent. Then, in the autumn of her 10th year of exile, the dominoes began to fall, just as her financial models had predicted they might. First, the Federal Reserve, in an effort to curb inflation, hiked interest rates twice in a single quarter. The river of cheap money that had fueled Julian's reckless expansion suddenly became a torrent of crushingly expensive debt. His monthly service payments on those massive loans ballooned overnight. Then, nature itself delivered the second blow. An unseasonably late frost, a silver blanket of death, descended upon Napa Valley, devastating nearly 30% of that year's Cabernet Sauvignon crop, Luna Sol's most profitable grape. It was the perfect storm. Cash flow from sales withered, while the debt obligations soared. Julian missed a crucial payment to his primary lender, a technical default that triggered a panic clause in his loan agreement. The bank, a regional institution already nervous about its exposure in the agricultural sector, made a quiet decision. Bundle the entire Luna Sol debt portfolio and sell it off at a discount to an institutional buyer to get it off their books. This was it. The signal flare she had been waiting for. Before the portfolio even hit the open market, an alert pinged on Isabella's encrypted work phone. It was from a contact deep within the banking world, a professional relationship she had carefully cultivated for years. The message was simple. The wolf is at the door of Luna Sol. Isabella opened the attached file on her laptop. She saw the numbers, the weaknesses, the personal guarantees Julian had foolishly signed. It was all there. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was a perfectly constructed trap, and the bait was finally ready. The hunt was about to begin. There's a unique power in seeing a decade of patience finally come to fruition. If you've ever played the long game in your own life, waiting for the perfect moment to make your move, just type the current time wherever you are. I want to feel that collective, patient power in the comments right now. The day of the auction, Isabella wasn't in the tense San Francisco bidding room. She was exactly where she had been for the last 10 years. In her Spartan, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, overlooking the steel and glass heart of the financial world. The commanding view was her daily reminder of the power she had fought for. On her polished desk were 3 things: a glass of still water, a phone, and a single, smooth gray stone she had picked from the creek bed at Luna Sol as a child. It was her anchor to the past and her focus for the future. Through a secure earpiece, she listened to her lead attorney, who was acting as her silent, anonymous proxy in the auction. Bidding is at $42 million, her lawyer's calm voice crackled. Vanguard Capital is still in. Other firms were circling, vulture funds smelling what they thought was a discounted asset. Isabella let them fight. She instructed her lawyer to place small, incremental bids, letting the other funds drive the price up, bleeding Julian's hope away drop by drop. This wasn't just about winning, it was about demonstrating overwhelming force. It was about ensuring he knew he was being systematically dismantled, not just outbid by a bigger wallet. They're at $44.5 million. I think this is their final offer, her lawyer said, a question in his tone. Isabella picked up the small stone, its familiar smoothness a conduit to her resolve. 45, she commanded, her voice perfectly even, betraying no emotion. And that's our only and final bid. Make it clean. A moment of silence stretched across the continent, feeling like an eternity. Then, her lawyer's voice returned, laced with triumph. The gavel fell. We have it. It's yours. Isabella felt not a rush of glee, but a profound, settling calm. She disconnected the call, dialed a number from memory, and waited for her brother to pick up, ready to deliver the lines she had rehearsed in her mind for 3,652 days. A week later, Isabella returned to Napa Valley for the first time in 10 years. She didn't drive an old pickup truck. She arrived in a sleek black sedan that crunched softly on the gravel driveway she knew so well. She stepped out, dressed not in a Wall Street power suit, but in simple, elegant trousers and a cashmere sweater. She wasn't here as a CEO, she was here as the rightful heir. Ignoring the monstrous visitor center, she walked directly into the fields, her expensive leather boots sinking slightly into the familiar soil. The earth felt the same, but the vines looked tired, their leaves lacking the vibrant, deep green she remembered. They looked neglected. Julian found her there, standing by the rows of old-growth Zinfandel vines, his face a wreck of sleepless nights and shattered pride. Isabella, you can't do this, he began, his voice cracking. This is our family's legacy, our father's work. Have you no heart? When she remained silent, his fear curdled into rage. You're a vulture. That's what you are. You waited for me to struggle and then you swooped in to pick at the bones. You're trying to destroy me. Isabella finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable, unmoved by his outburst. Destroy you? She asked, her voice quiet but carrying more weight than all his shouts. You did that yourself, Julian. I just signed the paperwork. He started to appeal to their shared blood, their childhood, but she held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't you dare talk to me about family. A family protects its own. It doesn't erase them for a better balance sheet. She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. You looked at these vines and saw dollar signs. I look at them and I see our grandparents' hands. I see Dad's sweat. I see my own soul. You didn't just mismanage a business. You sold our family's spirit for a glass building and a few flashy magazine articles. I didn't come here to destroy you. I came to reclaim what you threw away. That moment when the truth is finally spoken, raw and unfiltered, it's everything. If you felt the power in that confrontation, if you've ever had to finally set the record straight with someone who wronged you, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm these are the family revenge stories that need to be heard. Later that evening, after Julian had retreated in defeated silence, Isabella found herself wandering through the main house. It felt smaller than she remembered, the air thick with the ghosts of a life that was no longer hers. That's where her mother found her, standing in the dusty, quiet library, running a hand over their father's old leather-bound books. Her mother, who had been a passive, silent observer to the entire tragedy a decade ago, now approached with fresh tears in her eyes. She hadn't defended Isabella then, but she was here now to defend the fragile, fractured illusion of their family. Isabella, please, she began, her voice a fragile whisper that grated on Isabella's nerves. He's your brother. What you're doing, it's tearing what's left of this family completely apart. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him? For my sake. For the memory of your father? It was the classic appeal of the complicit. A plea for peace without any acknowledgement of the war, a desperate request for forgiveness without an apology for the original sin. The Isabella of 10 years ago might have broken, might have felt the crushing weight of that maternal guilt and given in. But the woman standing in that library now was forged from different, stronger steel. Isabella turned from the bookshelf, her own gaze sad but unyielding. "I've had 10 years to think about what family means, Mom," she said softly, her voice devoid of anger but full of profound disappointment. "Family isn't just blood. It's supposed to be your fortress. It's loyalty. It's protecting each other, especially when it's hard. Where was that fortress for me when I needed it?" She saw the flicker of pain in her mother's eyes, but continued, needing to speak the truth. "Forgiveness isn't a magic word you say to make the past disappear. It has to be built on a foundation of truth and remorse. The door to my heart isn't locked forever, but Julian has to be the one to knock. And you have to be the one to finally acknowledge that you just stood by and watched him turn the key." Isabella didn't wait for an apology that might never come. Her purpose was never to linger in the ashes of the past, but to build a future from them. The very next morning, she put on a pair of sturdy work boots, tied her hair back, and began the long, arduous process of reclamation. Her first phone calls weren't to architects or marketing firms, but to the old hands, the seasoned vineyard managers and cellar masters that Julian had arrogantly dismissed as dinosaurs. She found them working at other wineries across the valley or in quiet retirement. She visited each one personally, sitting in their kitchens, and asked them to come back home to Luna Sol. Without exception, every single one of them said yes. Her return to the fields was a baptism. She walked every single acre, her fingers tracing the brittle leaves of the neglected vines, her heart aching at the subtle signs of exhaustion in the soil. The vibrant ecosystem she had once nurtured was out of balance. So, she began to heal it. Day by day, she worked alongside her returning crew, pruning back the careless overgrowth, composting, cover cropping, and patiently undoing the damage of Julian's soulless, high-volume methods. As for Julian himself, she didn't fire him. She didn't exile him as he had done to her. She offered him a fate far more instructive, a salaried, powerless position in the logistics department, coordinating shipping schedules from a small, windowless office in the back of the winery. He was a ghost in his own fallen kingdom, forced to watch, day after day, as his sister resurrected the very soul he had tried to sell, using the very methods he had mocked. He saw the genuine respect in the eyes of the crew as they spoke to her. He saw the deep green life returning to the vines. And he was forced to process the paperwork for the slow, steady, and profitable return of Luna Sol to its former, authentic glory. 2 years passed. The Napa Valley sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and deep purple, colors that were now mirrored in the healthy, heavy grape clusters hanging from the revitalized vines of Luna Sol. Isabella stood on the wraparound porch of her childhood home, swirling a glass of deep red Zinfandel, the first full vintage created entirely under her restored leadership. It was complex, earthy, and resilient. It tasted like home. It tasted like victory. Julian was still there, a quiet, humbled figure in the logistics office, his arrogance replaced by a grudging respect. Her mother had started visiting for dinner on Sundays. The conversations were often stilted, but the first fragile shoots of a true, honest relationship were beginning to grow. The healing was slow, but it was real. Isabella took a sip of the wine, the flavors telling a story of survival and rebirth. In the end, she had learned that true justice wasn't a single, fiery act of vengeance. It was the patient, daily work of rebuilding what was broken, of proving your own value through your actions, not just your anger. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing something beautiful thrive in your care. The most profound family revenge stories, the ones that truly empower us, aren't just about destruction. They're about reclamation. She looked out over the land that was now truly hers, not by a legal will or a corporate document, but by spirit, by sweat, and by an unbreakable will. She had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of all. They can take your inheritance, they can steal your title, they can erase your name from a piece of paper, but they can never, ever take your inherent worth. The most powerful legacy is never the one that's simply given to you. It's the one you are forced to forge for yourself in the fire. And if you believe in the power of forging your own path, of building your own legacy brick by painful brick, then you've found your community. Subscribe to this channel And let's continue to share these stories of incredible resilience and ultimate reclamation together. Your journey matters here.